We're joined now by Peter Vincent, a former U.S. counterterrorism official. He's joining us from Minnesota. Peter, it seemed as though a day ago the narrative was the shooter had declared an allegiance to ISIS. He appeared to be a homegrown terrorist. Now there are these reports coming out. He may have had a conflicted sexual identity, psychology. He'd gone to this gay bar on a number of occasions. There's a report from the Palm Beach Post posted just a couple hours ago, a former classmate saying that he was gay. Do you think that this is muddied now? Does it still look like a terrorist attack to you, or perhaps just a hate crime aimed at the LGBT community?
Good evening, Mike. You know, the more that this investigation advances, the more sort of confusing and complicated and, in fact, conflicting it becomes. As you've pointed out, the original thought was that this was an act of terrorism by an individual who had declared his allegiance or his support or an affinity for 1 to 3 different terrorist groups. Part of the confusion was he declared his affinity or allegiance to ISIL during a 9/11 call, which is a Sunni-based group, and then he declared also, evidently, his allegiance or support to al-Nusra, which is an al-Qaeda branch in Syria. He also allegedly at some time declared an interest or an affinity for Lebanon-based Hezbollah, which is a Shia-based terrorist group. None of these individual groups get along. In fact, they're in direct competition. Now you add this additional layer of confusion and complexity and contradictions regarding whether or not he targeted the gay and lesbian community, or whether or not he himself, because he was struggling with some internal sexual identity demons, actually, out of shame or out of embarrassment or something, actually cased these places and then went out and attacked these innocent individuals at this nightclub that he, as you point out, had allegedly frequented. He was also, according to recent reports, active on at least 3 gay websites, apps, I should say, looking for dates or hookups with gay men in the community.
Yeah, there's been a lot of questioning about the FBI dropping the ball on this, but I mean, you pointed out, and I think James Comey hit this yesterday, you know, Hezbollah, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, ISIS, none of it added up. As you look at the information, it's pretty confusing. I mean, some people feel like FBI missed the signals, but the signals were all over the place, weren't they?
Absolutely, Mike. The FBI did not miss any signals. As we've been discussing, there's conflicting information, inherently contradictory, based on his support or allegiance to 3 different groups who are mortal enemies, as well as perhaps hatred of gays and lesbians, but perhaps actually being gay himself, or at least having engaged in sexual activity with men. The FBI did not drop the ball. They are limited by the U.S. Constitution and the domestic investigation operations guidelines that limit what they're able to do out of respect, of course, for basic civil rights. They investigated twice. I understand that at least the first investigation, commencing in 2013, was a fairly thorough investigation, and then they investigated again in 2014. They don't have the authority under U.S. law to continue investigations without finding some sort of probable cause that would enable them to continue those investigations, let alone arrest an individual who hasn't taken any overt steps towards committing an act of terrorism or a crime.
Peter, one of the things our viewers are probably struggling with is this concept that the FBI can question this guy, they can follow him, and that you can even end up on a terror watch list in this country where you can still be able to go out and buy a gun, and not just a gun, but a weapon that was created in the 50s. Eugene Stoner developed the AR-15 to market to militaries. Is there something that should be done I mean, you were on the Department of Justice, Homeland Security. Is there something that should be done with regards to these kinds of weapons?
Well, certainly there has been a great deal of discussion for a long time, but especially given the absolutely heartbreaking, horrendous, and unfortunately historic events in Orlando of just 3 days ago, to prevent individuals that are on the terrorist screening center, the FBI's terrorist screening center's watch list, the terrorist watch list. There are over 500,000 individual persons on that particular list, but under current law, one cannot be denied in and of itself because their name appears on that particular watch list. So that is certainly something that the authorities can do. The other that has been discussed option is to reinstate the assault ban on assault weapons. That is obviously very, very political, and there are entrenched interests on both sides that are pushing for that. This may be, tragically, the sort of gross slaughter of innocent individuals out enjoying an evening of dancing and listening to music and laughter that may spur real change in this area.
Peter Vincent joining us from Minnesota. Thanks so much for your insights.